Let's talk about that. During the G7 summit on Monday, President Trump met with Prime Minister Mark Carney of Canada. The two leaders allegedly agreed to pursue a trade agreement within the next month. Prime Minister Mark Carney is preparing to lead his country through a trade war that his country did not request, and he is delivering a strong and unambiguous message to the White House. Never once our country, our resources, our water, or our land. However, President Trump is attempting to destroy us so that America can possess us. These are not just threats. There is no way that will ever occur. At the G7 conference, President Donald Trump and Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney shook hands in front of cameras and declared their desire to pursue a trade agreement within a month. Because governors in the northeastern United States were already preparing for the warning indicators weren't limited to government buildings. They were on highways that, until recently, transported tens of thousands of Canadian tourists each month. In shuttered businesses, in empty hotels, and in eateries that had been abandoned. Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey had had enough. I believe that gathering a group of us was crucial in order to discuss how we might further our own connections and alliances regarding trade, energy supply, and tourism. I invited Governor Hochul of New York and the other New England governors to meet with Canadian presidents in Boston the other day, for instance, D.C., or with diplomats. To help us defeat the YouTube algorithm and to show your support, please hit the like button before we commence. It was an unparalleled assembly. On the other side of Canadian provincial leaders were governors from New Hampshire, Connecticut, England, New York, Vermont, Maine, and New Hampshire. No pomp or cameras, just the pressing question. As the federal government forces us into a trade war with our closest ally, how do we safeguard our local economies? Healey stated rather clearly that Canada is our largest trading partner. Additionally, Trump is taxing our states as if they were hostile. She spoke in a calm tone. Her data was incorrect. It was just June, and Massachusetts had already experienced a 20 to 60% decline in Canadian travel. Hotels were reporting cancellations on a record basis. Some of the wealthiest tourists in North America were voting with their money, and Canadian homeowners in Florida were escaping the area. It was not a theoretical impact. It was heartbreaking, and it was personal. Please click the subscribe button to show your support for the channel before we proceed. This goes beyond politics, Healey added, as a result of Canadians canceling vacations, leaving summer residences, and avoiding our cities completely. Workers, families, and business owners are being laid off. Sterling Moore stood inside the point of view in Old Orchard Beach, Maine, a village about 150 miles from the Canadian border, gazing at his blank reservation book. The Canadian side had vanished. For several years, Morse had been welcome French. Canadian families, same rooms, same weeks, same families. Not this year, we're 90% down, Moore stated. They're not coming because they're upset. He produced a box containing last year's registration cards. Canadian flags are seen on nearly everyone. He muttered, "This doesn't pay the bills. This isn't effective." It wasn't difficult to locate the trigger. He claimed that Canadians have been defrauding us for decades, referred to Prime Minister Carney as a glorified governor, and made jokes about Canada being the 51st state. The change was difficult for snowbirds like Gary and Carol Cruz, who had been traveling to the U.S. 5 months a year for more than 10 years, the words, "We love America." This feels like a gut punch from a closest friend. Even though we spend more than $30,000 annually on trips to the U.S., just this year, the cruise lines had canceled 2 Disney vacations. By spring, their RV, which was often parked somewhere between Florida and Arizona, would remain in Ontario. And they weren't by themselves. In order to entice Canadians to return, state tourism bureaus in Florida, New York, California, and Illinois launched focused advertising efforts. Visit us, please. One advertisement from California said, "We're not Trump." Another included pictures of serene seaside communities with the words, "We're still your neighbors." However, even if a place was politically welcome, crossing the border still meant traveling through Trump's America, so Canadians weren't buying it. For many, the prospect of passports, flags, and questioning was enough to keep them at home. Healey was back in Massachusetts, calculating the wider effect. Tariffs on lumber have caused construction costs to skyrocket. causing affordable housing projects all around the state to stall. She clarified that about all of the lumber we use comes from Canada. We are now spending more money to construct fewer dwellings. The calculations don't work. Another industry was severely impacted by aluminum tariffs. Beer, one of the biggest craft brewing industries in the nation, is found in Massachusetts. All aluminum cans, Canadian good companies are being penalized for a trade war they did not request. Energy then appeared. Over the following 5 years, it was estimated that Trump's tariffs on Canadian imports of electricity and natural gas will increase utility and heating expenses in New England by $2.5 billion. Healy said, "That's a tax, a Trump tax imposed." On professionals, Democrats weren't the only ones who said it. It was also being seen by Republican governors from border states. All of this lost tourism, rising energy prices, declining house starts, rural areas. Healy outlined what she referred to as a regional reaction in Boston. Governors would actively approach Canadian provinces about energy collaborations. They would look into rail link projects, negotiate cross-border travel packages, and get waivers for essential infrastructure and supplies like aluminum and lumber. "We will," she declared, "if Trump is unable to work with Carney." However, that didn't stop the harm that had already started. The hospitality sector in Massachusetts had suffered a direct blow. Bartenders, housekeepers, and waitstaff all had to deal with reduced hours and cutbacks, and the impact was enormous. Beverage distributors, citing craft beer, unsold inventory, cans piling up in storage facilities, and all of this related to tariffs. And there were actual people losing their jobs for every politician that gave a press conference. Even the old Orchard Beach Chamber of Commerce acknowledged that 30 to 40% of dozens of local companies' yearly sales came from Canadian tourists. The director stated that this has an impact on more than just tourism. Food, service, retail, real estate, automobiles, and sales are all impacted. It is systemic. Trump, meanwhile, said nothing. No diplomatic outreach, no indication of a walkback, no clarifying message. Governors were instead left to attempt federal diplomacy, while their constituents bore the repercussions. Trump's sole public response to the economic consequences took one of the most strange turns when he made fun of European leaders for pleading for gas and claiming that his tariff battle was winning. However, the data presents a different picture. Following his meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping, French President Emmanuel Macron had already started to change course. Following Trump's tariff campaign, Macron signed 18 bilateral agreements. In the fields of infrastructure, aviation, and agriculture, advanced French energy contracts with Beijing, and demanded strategic and economic independence from the U.S. economists on the other side of the Atlantic were concerned about the move. Because Trump's trade battle won't only cost him Canadian tourists if France follows through and other European nations do the same. It might lead to the long-term decline of U.S. trade supremacy. First, the people who are experiencing it, Washington, they are not lobbyists. They work as tour guides in Montreal, hotel owners in Maine, waitresses at Cape Cod restaurants, beer, distributors in Vermont, and snowbirds who are abruptly canceling everything after decades of spending the winters in America. Gary Cruz stated, "We're not trying to pick a fight. We simply don't want to be made fun of. We don't want to pay criminal taxes. All we want to do is travel to the nation we once referred to as our second home." One message overshadowed all others during that conference in Boston, from presidents, governors, and common people on both sides of the border. Enough is enough. The Northeast is not going to wait for Trump to repair the harm. With their Canadian partners, they are constructing new political and physical bridges. They are also making it apparent that the states will take the lead if Washington is unable to, because someone must fill the void created by tariffs.